So good evening, everyone. My name's Helen Parr. I work for Devon Wildlife Trust on the Green Minds project in Plymouth. Devon Wildlife Trust are partner on this exciting Plymouth City Council-led project, which is funded by the European Regional Development Fund's Urban Innovative Actions. That's quite a mouthful. And within the project, we're encouraging people to develop a green mindset, putting nature and wildlife at the heart of decisions made around Plymouth's green spaces. So for Devon Wildlife Trust, it's a really great opportunity to bring our experience and enthusiasm for wildlife and nature to a large city like Plymouth. There's so many green spaces in the city, and not forgetting the blue spaces as well, the ocean and the estuaries surrounding. It's all about making space for nature and helping local people reconnect with the natural world and getting all the physical and mental health benefits that we know this can bring. So it's a win-win situation, hopefully. So part of this work is to offer events and training. So we've got online talks like this, but also if you live in Plymouth, you can look out for other events where we might be doing things on the grounds and practical conservation activities in Plymouth as well. And you can find out about all our events on the greenmindsplymouth.com website and also lots more about the project as well. So moving on swiftly so we get the benefit of the talk that we're about to have onto the talk. We're going to learn the basics of winter twig identification, a great activity to encourage us all outdoors in January. It's a pretty gloomy month, isn't it? And our speaker tonight, I'm pleased to say, is Jess Smallcombe, who's a community ecologist at Devon Biodiversity Records Centre. And I think over to you, Jess, if you'd like to share your presentation with us, and I'll keep an eye on any questions in the chat.
Thanks, Helen. Hopefully everyone can hear me and everyone can see the screen. Yes, welcome. Great to see so many people here. Tonight I'm going to go through a bit of information on common winter twigs. We can't do all of the species you're likely to see because we would be here until midnight, and I'm sure that everyone would like to leave before then. So how to identify our most common deciduous trees in winter. So Helen has already given a great introduction to the Green Minds project in Plymouth. Just so you know, it's running until sort of late next year now, and my role within that is to deliver various citizen science training and talks like this, and generally kind of helping people to learn a bit more about the nature around them, help to record some of the things that are in Plymouth, and just sort of, yes, connect with those green spaces. So here are quite a few common tree species. We're not going to go through all of these tonight, but we are going to go through the ones on the left-hand side, or most of them. So there are plenty, but what I would like to share with you this evening is the knowledge of how to sort of start looking at the different parts of twigs and the different parts of trees that are going to help you to identify that when there's no leaves on, so that you can sort of have a little extra element to your walks over the next couple of months. So we're going to find these twigs in various places. A huge variety of species can be found in hedges. There are some that are more associated with hedges than others, but you will find so many different trees in hedges if you really look. There are lots that are predominantly hawthorn or blackthorn, oak. Ash is a really common tree that you get in hedgerows as well, often as the tall trees within hedgerows. Often hedges can be quite heavily trimmed or flailed, which make them look really gnarly, and it can actually be difficult to find a really good twig sometimes, so you might have to hunt in some of those hedges to find a good twig with buds on. As we kind of progress towards spring, that will change and they'll grow more. So obviously we're going to find lots of trees within woodlands. There are a huge range of different woodlands within Devon, and even within Plymouth there are various types of woodland. So we're really lucky that within Devon we've got some temperate rainforest. rainforest is something that we might usually think of as tropical rainforest, but that's around the equator. But you do get temperate rainforests. We get enough rain, and so we get some really, really wet woodland as well. We've got woodlands up on the moors and down near the coast. So oak and birch do really well pretty much everywhere. Beechwoods prefer chalky soil, so you tend to get them sort of East Devon. There's also wood pasture, so a little bit more open, and wet woodlands. But you get different species of trees, different groups of tree species that will grow in different areas, depending on where you are, what the soil is like, the altitude, things like that will really affect the different species. So some of the things to look at when you're going to try and start identifying your tree. If it's a big tree, then before you even get close enough to see the buds, you can just look at the shape of the tree. That can really tell you quite a lot. I've got some pictures in a moment that show the real variety of the shapes of the trees that we get. You can, even at this time of year, look for leaves on the ground, always a good clue, particularly in places like beech woodlands. They last for a really long time. Although if you've got a big variety of trees, then they'll obviously blow around, so you can't rely on that. You can look at the bark. That will change on every tree, particularly like as it ages. And you'll also find that some trees might get completely covered in lichen and you can barely see the bark as well. So you need to look for some of those new twigs, which is what we're going to cover this evening. The colour of the twigs, the position of the buds on the twigs, and things like thorns or catkins, various fruits might still be on the twigs even throughout the winter. So here is a few images. I just went for a walk. I live in Exeter and I took a few pictures as I was walking around the different shapes of trees that you can get. So here's a willow. We've got some chestnuts here, birch. This is a hornbeam. I always think they're great. They're quite sort of neat, but at the same time a little bit punky. And an oak tree, they're always really beautiful. I think they look like upside down lungs with all those spreading branches. And hazel, which is a classic tree to be coppiced. So here you can see that there's lots of small shoots that have come up in a coppice. You get a few different species that can be coppiced, but hazel is probably the most common. And so if you see sort of lots of small branches coming out from one place, that's probably a good start to say that it's going to be hazel. So looking at the bark, you can get some trees with really super lovely smooth bark, such as particularly the younger beeches and hornbeams. Ash is a tree that's really smooth when it's young, and like various other species, it becomes really heavily lined and has these fissures as it gets older. This image here is of a sweet chestnut, and it has these lovely grooves, and I hope that you can see they kind of spiral around the trunk. I don't think the photo does it justice. This is a beautiful tree. I would only be about this tall against it. Beautiful big tree with bark that spirals around. Bark of silver birch, as I'm sure we all would recognise that one. Really light, very sort of papery. Sycamore as well. That one actually starts to sort of flake off with age rather than getting particularly grooved. And it can almost, on some of the older trees, have a sort of like a camo pattern, like you might find on some sort of military uniform. And then elm, elder and field maple all become quite corky. And that, I actually saw some elm in a hedgerow yesterday, and it really is, if you squeeze it, it's it almost sort of gives way. It feels quite soft, the bigger branches, really sort of corky texture. Cherry is a classic one that has these horizontal stripes across the trunk. And then you can also get bark that's really shiny. So hazel and blackthorn have really lovely shiny bark. So already you can see between the shape of the tree and the different sort of textures of the bark, there's already so much variety within the tree species, even ones that are really common that we're going to see all the time. And I mentioned as well, there are other things you can look at, like thorns. So the big image here is blackthorn, really, really big, spiky, sharp thorns. Hawthorn, smaller thorns, rose as well. We'll find a lot of rose within hedgerows, with the little sort of triangular thorns rather than these spikes. You can look for leaf scars. So a leaf scar, I do have an image on one of the species, is if you imagine the leaf on its stalk is attached to the branch, and then in autumn when that falls, it leaves a little mark on the branch that's particularly noticeable in some species, like a little triangle where the leaf was. There's something called lenticels, which I do have a good image. Hopefully I'll put it in somewhere in here. But lenticels are almost like the little dots and freckles that you get on twigs. So you can, blackthorn doesn't actually have very many, but there's a few little dots that you see on the twig, and those are lenticels. And some species, they're a lot more prominent and noticeable than others. You might see from, so actually probably since almost since the leaves started to fall, you can start seeing buds on some species. They really are starting to come out already. And those you can look at the position of the buds, so whether they are sort of opposite or spiral. We'll see that in the next slide. And also some of the buds have got these sort of protective scales on them as well, so you might need to look quite closely for those. And as I said, fruits, sometimes flowers even through winter, and the general colour. So for example, the blackthorn that we've got here, the sloes that that are the fruits of blackthorn can often stay on the plant for a really long time. And then flowers and catkins. So we've got a bit of hazel in the image in the corner, and that's really showing a lot of catkins at the moment. So I talked about leaf bud positions, and I'm afraid I've actually left the words in the images. They don't match. So this image here are opposite. So that's hopefully it's reasonably self-explanatory. You get one on one side, one on the other, and then they almost happen at 90 degrees and then back again. These ones are spiraling around. So hopefully that image shows that they're not opposite, they just spiral around towards the bud at the end. And then alternate. So one on one side, one on the other side, and so forth until the end. And what this can give you, the alternating buds, is it can give almost a sort of slight pink zigzag on the twig. This is a little bit pronounced in this image, just to really drive that point home, but it does give a little kind of waviness to the twig. So for some things you might need to look a little bit closer. So yes, here's the lenticels. So these little dots, almost like little freckles that you get on the bark. They just happen so naturally on the bark. They're not as a result of any particular damage. You might find hairs. So there's little hairs on this new twig here. This is the leaf scar I was talking about. This one is really, really obvious. This is a like a garden variety of chestnut. So it's got really huge buds and huge leaf scars. This is one that's got these sort of hairs come out by the bud as well. And I was talking about the scales, leaf scales, and this is what I meant by these. So there's protective scales over the bud. This is oak, which we'll cover next actually, so I might just move on to oaks. So this is, for me, it's probably one of my favourite types of tree. As I said, the tree itself almost looks like lungs. They really do just branch out and branch out. We have two particularly common or usual types of oak, which are the sessile and the English oak, which is also known as pedunculate oak. The only sort of easy way to tell them apart is by looking at the acorns. So if you find any acorns on the ground, you can tell the two apart, and that is the pedunculate or English oak has acorns on stalks. So you get the acorn and then it'll have a stalk, so a couple of centimetres long, whereas sessile oak has acorns that just grow straight. They don't have a long stalk on them at all. They really grow very close to the branch, the twig, when they're produced. So that is the best way you can tell the two species apart, because otherwise they do look really, really similar in winter. Very branched, similar colour buds, these lovely rusty brown buds with all these scales. And something that you can really easily spot with an oak tree is the terminal bud. So that's the one at the end, or in this case, it's a cluster. So lots of species, you'll just get the one bud at the end of a twig, but with oak, you get a little cluster of them. So that's a really, really quick, easy way to know if you've got an oak tree. They've got lots and lots of scales. So there's a slight difference between the two species in the number of scales, but that's something you really need to look very closely at. The bark of older oaks is really fissured. I think we've all seen those lovely sort of mature or veteran trees that are really, really fissured and great bark. But when it first grows, it can be quite smooth. Although I know this is actually a little bit wrinkly on this particular twig, but it's a little bit variable, but new bark can be quite smooth. And it's a kind of greyish brown colour on the twigs. Now, colour is something that you can use, but remember it's mostly just sort of indicative. It's not absolutely definite, as colour can be a little bit variable between trees of the same species. I've just put this one in because I think this is a really fantastic sort of structure around the bud. So this is a different sort of oak, and I think it's also important just to mention that if you are looking at buds and tree species, particularly if you're looking around Plymouth or even Exeter, any sort of big city or town, remember that a lot of the trees within the town or city are probably being planted there by people. So they might have been imported or of a slightly different variety than you'd find out in a woodland. So I thought I'd put this one in just to sort of make a point, really. So this is an oak. You can just about see the leaves in the background here, and it's this particular one is really well known for keeping its leaves on over winter. So you get they look sort of roughly the shape of sort of normal oak leaves, but really, really sort of extra defined. The Luckham oak is more common in the Exeter area, but you do find turkey oaks all over the place. And the buds have got these really long sort of hairs and sort of points on them. Very, very distinctive. So you might not find that one very often, but I thought I'd just make a point that you do find species that don't seem to conform to what you might see in a book for winter twigs because they've maybe been imported. So on to ash. So this is one that has the one terminal bud at the end of the twig. It has otherwise opposite buds really nicely, and they're so sort of characteristic, and you can spot ash so easily because the buds are just this lovely sort of matte black colour on a greeny grey twig. The terminal buds are usually the largest ones, so they can be really quite big, and otherwise they're quite small and opposite as they come down the twigs. There's one here, there'll be one on the other side as well. Here you can see there's a few of the lenticels as well on this twig. They are overall grey but can have a bit of a green tinge. Lovely smooth bark when it's young, and they do, as they get older, become more fissured, as so many other species do. And they often hold on to their seeds over winter. So these are the ash keys, and you'll find these on, like, often still held on over winter. You might see things like this in the summer as a sign of ash dieback, but ash dieback is quite difficult to spot in winter unless you really know what you're looking for. So it's something that you'd see a lot more of in summer. So for now, we'll just going to cover about how you can tell ash trees generally. Onto beech. This is a really lovely tree that you often get in hedges because it keeps that gorgeous rusty orange colour. When they do get mature, they can become really, really big. And when you do get those woodlands from beech, you get very little undergrowth, and that's because of the beech nuts falling and all these dry leaves. It really suppresses growth below these large beech trees. You can see the beech nuts down here. So if you do go through a beech wood, normally you are walking through layers and layers of the beech nuts. But as I said, beech woodlands generally form on slightly more chalky soils, although you will find smaller beeches on every other soil really. Lovely smooth bark until the tree is really quite old. So they do stay smooth until they're pretty big. And the leaves do tend to remain on the hedges and young trees over winter. Now, hedges and young trees often keep particularly young trees, do keep their leaves on longer than more mature trees in lots and lots of species, which is just quite an interesting point. So if you imagine that you're a small tree and you're growing in a woodland and there's all these huge big trees above you, throughout the summer you don't actually get that much sunlight. And so when the big trees start to sort of shut down for the winter and lose their leaves, the young trees tend to hold on to them a little bit longer and really make the most of that sort of autumn sunlight that they get coming through. And that sometimes happens with hedges as well. And beech is a species that they really, really do hold on to those until the leaves are probably not providing them with anything anyway. You can see here that the buds that form are very different to the ones we've seen so far. They're really, really long and pointy. They've got the scales on them, really, really distinctive. And notice that they're coming out at quite a large angle away from the twig. There is a species later on that's got similar shaped buds, but notice that these ones really do come out away from the twig. Sort of a reddish brown colour, again, sort of rusty, very similar to the leaves. And that's beech trees. So birch, you can probably tell birch before you get close enough to see the buds. They are really lovely silhouette. They're very delicate, drooping. And birch you'll find, so as we covered with beech and oak, you can get really big trees. Birch trees just don't get that big. They sort of have a much shorter lifespan than some of our other trees. And so most of the birch trees you'll find will still be quite small, particularly compared to the oaks and beeches that you might see. So silver birch in particular has a really distinctive drooping of the branches, whereas there is another species called downy birch, which is a little bit more erect. So these drooping branches, but on quite a straight trunk. Silver birch has bark that's often very pale, quite shiny, very smooth, but it can become quite bumpy and gets sort of marks on it with age. The twigs are browny purple. You often get catkins. So these are the catkins on the end here. So you get those at this time of year. There is a general rule of thumb that if the twigs are hairy, then it's downy birch. But if they're hairless and warty, then they're silver birch. And I'm going to say that's a very general rule, because you do get hybrids, which is always a thing. Just as you think you've got the hang of which one's which, someone throws in hybrids and they might have a different mixture. So be aware of that. If it doesn't quite fit with one or the other, you might have a hybrid. The buds are quite small. They've got a bit of a point to them, but a sort of little bit blunt as well with this particular twig. Not nearly as pointed as some of the ones we've seen. And quite shiny. So I hope you can see in this picture, it actually picks up the sheen on the bud. And they're quite small. And you can see they've got this alternate pattern, which sort of sends the twig off on sort of a not completely straight path, and then that also helps with the drooping shape. So there are the two species of birch that you might see. And moving on to hawthorn, so a really classic hedgerow tree, or in the sort of scrubby understory of woodlands. It's a tree that really doesn't get very big. So the trees we've seen so far can reach quite a few meters high. Hawthorn, sort of 4 to 6 meters might be, you know, that would be quite a big tree. It really is a scrubby plant. The bark is grey brown when it's older, but the young twigs have a really reddish tinge. Actually, I was out in the rain yesterday, and there was this big hawthorn hedge, and it looked really red, especially with all the water on it. The thorns are small, or small-ish, compared to blackthorn, but they're still certainly enough to scratch, and they come off at sort of alternate again from the twig, and the buds that you'll find will be kind of at the base of these spines, and so that's how it gets a sort of, again, there's a little bit of a zigzag shape here. It's not hugely pronounced, but it does have a little wiggle. So yeah, really red tinge to the buds. They are, as you can see, they're really small on hawthorn. It's the spines that are going to really give this one away. And I've just put a little picture of it coming into leaf here, because I don't know, it seems to be, in my experience, it's one of the first ones to come into leaf often. So you may even start seeing some quite soon. I have seen some trees coming into leaf already this week. So this is a rather very spiny tree. Again, another scrubby one. Really big spines. So they are double, triple, sometimes 4 times as long as the hawthorn spines. The branches come off in all directions. As you can see here, they just jut off at right angles. When you get that big sort of mass of blackthorn scrub, it looks so tangled, it's so dense and difficult to get through because of all these branches going off. The sloes, as I mentioned earlier, can often remain on the tree through much of winter, and they're blackberries, and they're dark, as well as the bark of blackthorn is also quite dark. It's got a little bit of a sheen on it sometimes, and it's yeah, it changes a little bit with age, and it gets a little bit more silvery grey, but it's often very dark in the younger twigs. Buds are small, really small, and they grow on the stem and on the spines. So that's another difference with hawthorn, is that hawthorn, you get the buds just at the base of the spines, whereas on blackthorn you really get them along the spine as well. They're usually single buds, but you can get clusters. So I think I've got yeah. So here's a photo I've just taken in the last few days, actually, with blackthorn coming up, and you see these buds, and some of them are clustered, but otherwise they're sort of singly along these pointy spines. And you get the flowers come out on blackthorn before the leaves. So that's when in spring, when you see the sort of dark spiny hedgerow, and then you get these beautiful little delicate white flowers coming out as well. It probably won't be long until they start coming out, actually. So moving on, this is another species that is really very common through so much of our woodland, so many of our hedges, often found as a coppice. A lot of the coppices might be quite old. It's you know, lots of people do coppicing still, but often you'll find it hasn't been done for a while in some woodlands. The bark is really smooth and shiny, developing the sort of lenticels, but they're quite big warts on the hazel twigs. The new twigs are pale, well, I put pale brown and hairy, but sometimes they've got this gorgeous sort of almost goldy brown colour to them as well. Really, really beautiful colour. Often catkins are present, so you'll get those throughout the winter, which is another fantastic tell of what species it is. The buds are alternate, so as you can see, it's another slightly scruffy, messy twig as it comes off, buds at different places. The buds are sort of green to red brown, which I know sounds like a strange description. Here's one a bit closer up. So they're kind of green, but they've got this little reddish brown tinge and edges to the leaf scales as well. So you can see the buds there, and this is the stem, which is that sort of quite nice light golden brown colour and a little bit hairy as well. So these are usually quite obvious within a hedgerow or a woodland. The buds themselves they're quite fat, quite blunt. The scales are large. So thinking back to the image I showed you of the oak buds with all those tiny little neat scales, these ones are much, much larger. And of course, looking for hazelnuts underneath is definitely a giveaway. Hazelnuts are fantastic. That's why this is such a good hedgerow and sort of woodland plant. To have those hazelnuts do provide such a fantastic source of energy and food for so many animals throughout the winter. So hopefully by now there might still be some underneath the tree, or maybe the mice and squirrels have taken them all. So alder is a tree that's probably going to be a little bit less common. It usually likes quite damp places. And the shape, I don't have a shape, I didn't stand back and take a photo of this tree, I'm sorry, but it's got a sort of more conical crown to it. So rather than an oak tree that's nice and spreading, it's a lot sort of tighter and neater. The twigs are a little bit ridged and have the lenticels, but they're orange, sort of very faintly, but very definitely have an orange colour to them. And alder has the fruits or the catkins, they are present in female and male separately. So the cones here are the female fruiting catkins, and these are the male ones. So you'll get them on the same twig, but they look very, very different. So if you've got two types, that's probably a sign of an alder, particularly if it's somewhere a little bit damp. The buds themselves, I think, are quite distinctive. They spiral around the twig, and they're really bulbous. And this looks really dark, but it's got it's something that's really difficult to take a photo of, but it's got this fantastic deep purple colour, and they sometimes got a little sticky coating on them as well. People say they look like a boxing glove. And yeah, just really, really cool purple buds. So that's a species that you might not find sort of on your everyday, although this one is actually in a park really near me. You usually find alder in places where you've got lots of water, so maybe along an area with a stream or near a wetland where there's some standing water as well. So we've got a couple more. Elder. So again, a really shrubby sort of plant. The bark is corky, so that's the one I said, you know, if you give it a squeeze, it almost kind of gives in some of the older branches. The twigs, when they're young, though, are quite brittle and they contain pith. And actually, if you break one, it's a little bit hollow inside as well. So it's got this really soft, pithy inside with a little hollow bit running through the centre. The surface is angled, and it's got really prominent lenticels, which I haven't managed to catch very many of on here, but I promise you they're on there. The buds are in opposite pairs, and they've got a really scruffy appearance, and that's because they haven't got this protective coating of the leaf scales. They're just young leaves, so they probably just start to unfurl from there. and I did see some elder coming out just yesterday. So you can get it confused with field maple. So just sort of have a look. There are slight differences in the buds, in the colours, and field maple is a little bit more of a reddish tinge to the twigs when they're new, because you can get these sort of corky growths, the way that the branches and the twigs grow, and field maple can really produce some really sort of prominent wings that go around the twigs, and elder can get that a little bit as well. So do really check with the differences that you get between them. So it's the sort of red colour for the field maple, and this sort of pithy and slightly hollow inside to the twigs of the elder that you need to look at to distinguish the two. And horse chestnut, conkers, sort of many people's favourite tree, lots of fun. Really large and sprawling, and the branches sometimes arch down so that they start up and then they kind of swoop back down again. Sort of grey brown bark. This one's quite a sort of brownish reddish bark, and I think this is a good example of a tree. It's not our native one, but it was an example of a horse chestnut. So the twigs are grey brown with the white lenticels. So that's these bits here, you can just see in the bottom of this picture. The buds are in opposite pairs. So there's one, there should be another one on here, but maybe it got knocked off before it could grow. Really large, so that is easily a centimetre long, this bud, and really sticky. So you can see this is actually just the sort of the stickiness from the bud of the horse chestnut. And here we've got one of the really, really large leaf scales from where it dropped the leaf. So if you imagine a horse chestnut leaf is enormous, really. So it's going to have a really good anchor point to the branch. So that's why you can sort of maybe see the leaf scar really well from these. And of course, well, certainly by this time of the year, I expect there wouldn't be any conkers left around the bottom of a horse chestnut, especially not if it's somewhere that lots of people go to. But you might find some of the casings around them. Similarly with the sweet chestnut as well, you might find some of the cases and some of the sort of smaller nuts that you get in those along around the base of the tree that will help you know it is either horse or sweet chestnut. And this is my final species. I know it's lots of information, everyone, so I hope that it's all useful. And this is the hornbeam, and this is the lovely punky tree that I just think it's got a really great hairstyle. The bark is really smooth, similar to beech, becoming more furrowed as it gets older. You do find this one in parks quite a lot, and I've seen a few of them around Plymouth. Sometimes pollarded. The twigs are brown and they slightly zigzag because they've got these alternate buds. And if you look, the buds are similar in shape again to beech. So you might think, oh, it's got smooth bark and it's got these really long pointy buds, but hopefully you'll remember that the beech buds stick out away from the twig, whereas these ones really hug close to the twig stem. They've got visible scales as well, and these ones can be slightly hairy. But I think with a hornbeam, sometimes it's just simply the shape of the tree as you approach it that will give it away quite quickly. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour through some of our most common tree species. We do have a few places left, I think. We're going to do an in-person winter twig walk next Wednesday that you can book via Eventbrite at Central Park. So if anyone would like to come along, we're just going to have a look at some of these species and really test out if we can tell them apart. And so thank you very much. I think if anyone's got some questions, I think Helen's going to go through them.
Yes, thanks, Jess. That was really good. Do you want to? Yes, I've got a couple of questions that came up in the chat. Someone's just said thanks. That was great, excellent talk, clearly illustrated. Thank you so much. Sort of passed on that nice feedback. Somebody asked, Helen asked, where are the temperate rainforests in Devon?
So you get some, particularly kind of along the north coast. To be honest, there are various places within Devon because we're on the west coast. So you get these temperate rainforests all the way along kind of where you get the rain in from the Atlantic. So you get them along across Devon and up through Wales and sort of up towards Scotland as well. And so it's difficult to really spot, but we get them again, you know, across Dartmoor. You know, when you go into a woodland and it's just moss and lichen and really ancient woodlands, those are sometimes the temperate rainforests.
Okay, thanks, thank you. And then someone's asked a question about, Natalie's asked a question about sweet chestnut. I'll be interested if you can answer this one. Why does the bark of mature specimens of sweet chestnut spiral? You know how you get these, like it, like we have at Killerton National Trust. Yes,
yeah, they are absolutely amazing, aren't they, when you stand back and look at them in winter and you can really see the patterns on the bark. I'm going to hazard a guess, and it's to do with how they grow, although that would just be, you know, because as they grow up maybe they turn, and that's why you get the twist in the bark, but that is a bit of a guess, I'm afraid.
Okay, so that's good. I've got a couple of other points. Why didn't we see many acorns last year? Any explanation for that?
I don't know specifically for acorns, but I know that through with various species of tree and other plants, you'll get differences often depending on the weather. So last year, trying to remember back, but we had really long hot dry spells, didn't we, followed by, I think August was just a washout from what I can remember. And so sometimes you get the weather can really affect what a tree is doing, and they will respond differently depending on, you know, the energy that they have to be able to produce acorns. You will get some years where they're just, I remember a couple of years ago, my parents-in-law live along the road with oak trees, and you just were kicking them constantly because there were so many acorns. So I think that a lot of it is to do with the weather. Yeah, and then there will be you know, other environmental factors as well. And
it's called a mast, isn't it? So you have
mast year when they really put everything into it. Yeah, but they can't do that every year because it would be very energetically expensive.
Yes, okay. And then someone else said hope they can remember it all on their next walk. But what I was going to say was I think we're going to probably send out a follow-up email with a bit of information to everyone. And
yes, I didn't have an image of that in my talk, and I meant to pop one in because I made a few tweaks to it today. But I do have a sort of table with just the basics of looking at the bud colour, the position, the twig colour, the lenticels, and a few notes that Helen can send around to everyone. There are also some really fantastic resources out there on the internet.
Yeah, and I think there are some apps as well which are useful when you're out. So we'll send all that round to people as a follow-up, and so don't feel you have to remember it all, but
no, absolutely
we'll be able to watch it again if you want on the Green Minds YouTube channel.
No,
we'll send some things around. Yeah,
as I said at the beginning, sorry,
was just saying, would there be more talks in the future on, for example, flowers? I'm pleased to say the answer to that is yes. We've got some other online talks, and I think flowers might be one of them. Might be in the spring anyway. We might be doing more on that, or even some more in-person sort of wildflower walks. So do look out, keep an eye on the events pages for that. Got another horse chestnut related question. When Jill says, when a horse chestnut leaf falls off, does it leave a second horseshoe mark on the bark on the other side? Oh, over beside, or the one already there?
So yes, so I know. So yeah, because there was the leaf skull, wasn't there, and a bud right above it. So I don't know if it comes off at the same place. That's actually a really interesting question, because otherwise you'd end up with a whole row of them, wouldn't you? So maybe it grows there and then that scar anchors it. I'm going to go and find that out, Jill. Thank you.
Maybe we'll add that into the email. Yes, someone's actually asking, is there a particular guide book or that you would recommend for winter trees?
I'm going to come in and just I don't want to sort of advertise something. This is the one that I take with me. It's an FSC guide.
That's Field Studies Council.
Yeah, it's that I've got one that's more comprehensive that covers pretty much every tree species, but this is fantastic and light. And
so we could pop, what was that, just show people again so that in case they want to. So it's winter trees and it's the Field Studies Council, so people would be able to order that from them directly, I think.
Yes,
online. I've got a question about ash from Jennifer. Is it right that the branches of ash tilt upwards at the end a bit like a candelabra? Someone told me it was a good indicator.
So they can do. I won't go back to my pictures. I don't think I've got one good enough, but yeah, they can sort of come out and then tilt. But they look like they can be quite scruffy sometimes with all the ash keys hanging off, particularly as you get sort of later on in the summer. But yeah, they often have a little curve at the end. Right.
Okay. And then that, I think that's the end of the questions. I was just, what I took from it was this really important, isn't it, to take the context of where the tree is, and that can give you lots of clues, can't it? And also the nuts or seeds, and it's amazing how long some leaves lie on the ground for the whole winter, and so it can help you, if you know what your leaves look like, it can help you put all the clues together and come up with a good guess of what the tree would most likely be. I
hope that this evening's talk, it's not we don't expect everyone to remember all these different species, but to know the different things to look for, I think is really, really important, because that's, once you know what to look for, then you can start working out all the different trees.
And I just, if people are interested in trees generally, the Devon Wildlife Trust has a project which has just received its funding for the next 4 years called Saving Devon's Treescapes. If you look at the Devon Wildlife Trust website, you can find out more about that project. But there's lots of really exciting stuff like seed collecting and developing community tree nurseries, and also it's in certain areas of Devon, so have a look and see, it might be in one of the areas that you live in. And there's also having a number of tree hub events, and that will be on the Devon Wildlife Trust events pages, where people will be able to go to a local tree hub and collect a tree or trees to plant in their garden or local community. So I'd really encourage people to get involved in that, and that's another chance to look at some winter twigs and try and identify what they are.
And we're doing some citizen science with that project as well at the moment, so
okay, well, I think that's probably the end of all the questions. So I think it just sort of remains for us to say thank you. Finishing a few minutes early, which is nice. Thanks everybody for coming along. Do let us know, follow up with me on my email I put in the chat earlier. I hope you saw that, if you've got further questions, or contact us through Green Minds, and maybe some of you will be able to come along to some future events. So thanks very much everybody, and
thank you everyone for coming. Hopefully see you at another talk.